Alrighty, Mr. Stained Glass again coming at you with another holiday theme project. This one is a Christmas tree. Alrighty, so we've got our 4 pieces, and we're not going to need all that. You're going to have a lot of extra glass. And we've got 4 pieces to cut for the green glass and 1 piece to cut for the brown glass. So all this glass is going to be transparent for the most part, so you can see through it. Now you might need to either cut up one of your patterns to trace the piece, or you can use a light table. And using a light table is my preferred method if you cannot see through the glass. So we're going to go ahead and get to cutting. Okay, so we've got our cutter oiled up, and now we're going to start off with the green glass. Now this is an antique glass, and it's got a little bit of texture, but it's random, so we don't need to worry too much about the actual direction of the texture. Now, we want to get a pretty good yield out of this, and I'm going to show you a little trick that I like to do. So we're going to measure this. We're going to see, let's see, this is about 3/4 of an inch. This is 7/8. This is about 7/8. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to cut a 1-inch strip out of this green glass, and that's going to give us a really nice yield, so we're going to waste as little glass as possible. Now, in order to do that, we're going to need our ruler, of course, and a marker to mark the position to cut. Okay, so the way that you cut a strip off that's measured to a certain size is you orient the side of the ruler with the side of the glass, and then you just mark that 1-inch mark, bring it down to another position, mark that 1-inch mark, and then we're going to cut along those 2 marks. Now, if you want, you can do a 3rd mark. I can tell this is the same. In case you made a mistake, it's a good way to check yourself. So what you'll do is you'll bring your glass cutting tool, you bring the wheel, you'll place it on your mark, bring the ruler up to it, and then you will secure the ruler in that position, bring your wheel to the other mark, bring your ruler right up to that, and now you know that your ruler is oriented in the perfect position, that when you cut this piece of glass, you're going to have it go straight through both marks. See that score line? It went right through the middle of both marks, so that's how you want to do that. And if you heard that sound, it was a nice, consistent, even score. That's about how hard you want to be pushing on the cutter as you're pushing the glass. Now, in order to break the glass, you can use your hands like this. You can use your grosiers like this. You'll put the flat, this part on the top, and the curved part on the bottom. So it'll look something like this. And then I'm going to go ahead and show you one more way. You can also use these running pliers, and it's got this little mark right in the center. That's where you put the score line. And it's got these 2 jaws. They're curved and different. See, this one is curved one way, and this one's got the shape the other way. And you just make sure to have this part on top, the one that's got this kind of convex curve to it, and it has the line where your score should be. So you'll just line that up right in the middle. See if we can get it in the light there. See how that's lined up right in the middle? And you just apply some pressure, and it breaks the glass for you. So now we have this 1-inch strip, and if it hasn't made sense yet why we did that, it's going to right now. So now you see how this piece fits in there just perfectly, right? So what we'll do, we'll take our glass cutter. We're going to cut this part off first, because we don't want for this glass to be running and wasting the rest of our piece. So we'll do that score. I like to just tap the breakthrough. And if it's got some little minor fractured edges, we can go back to the grinder and take care of those. Let me sweep this pattern off. I don't want to get all those glass shards into my hands. There we go. We got this cut, and let's figure out how we cut it. I don't quite remember. Was it like this? There we go. So this is about how we cut that piece. And now we're going to finish it with the other side. So you just have to line it up really nicely right on that black line. And then we'll put the scoring wheel right in the middle of it. Nice consistent pressure. Make sure to keep that piece secured. And then we're going to cut this piece. There we go. And now these are going to be way too small to be breaking off with my hands or the running pliers, so we need to use the grosiers this time. So put the flat part on top and just rotate away. See that? Now we've got this tiny little piece. We're going to have to do the same exact thing. There we go. And it might not be a bad idea to wear some thicker gloves to protect your hands in case you're afraid of getting poked or stabbed, or make sure to at least keep a Band-Aid box nearby. So we've got this piece pretty much cut, and not too bad. So you can tell it's gonna need a little bit of grinding to take out some of those fractured edges, but for the most part, this is definitely gonna work. So now we've got that piece done, we'll move it aside. And this is where the power of doing that cutting came in. See that? Look at how efficient of a usage we're getting. Now we're able to just use that, getting a great yield. So we're gonna start off by cutting this side first. And that's because when I cut this one, I don't want it to break through and waste the rest of that piece. So that's why we separate this piece first like that. And I'm gonna show you a trick in a second where you can do all the scoring before breaking any glass, because it can be a little bit tedious to try to line it back up and then to try to hold in place such a small piece. So it's a little bit easier to hold in the rest of this piece while doing the rest of the scores. We're gonna show you that on the next one. So here, just like last time, get the scoring tool right on that line. Consistent, even pressure all the way through. Consistent, even pressure all the way through. And oh, see how I moved it? It's a little bit tricky to keep it in place when it's so small. So we're gonna line up those 3 edges that we've already cut because we know those are good. And now we're gonna cut this last one. There we go. Now these are some really, it's very thin, the amount of material between the edge and the score line. See that? So we're gonna have to really get this just barely on there. And sometimes it'll kind of fracture up the glass like that. That's okay, we can clean that up on the grinder. So now we'll check the fit. And here's the part that we can clean up on the grinder. See on the bottom there, it's got those dimpled edges right here, this little mountains, little peaks. We can go ahead and put those in the grinder. We'll see that in a little bit. Okay, so that's the second piece. Put that up next to the other one. Starting to look like a Christmas tree already. Okay, so now we've got this piece to do. Now I'm gonna show you that trick I was telling you about. So we are gonna start again with the furthest to the area where you have the most glass left. So I'm not starting from this side, I'm starting from this side because I have more glass left over here to use for the last piece. Now, we did that score line. Now I'm gonna secure all this area with this offhand. That's going to give me the easiest way to make sure that I can hold this piece in place while doing all the scores. And it's a little bit more glass to hold on to instead of just this spot. So I've got that. Now I'm gonna do this cut. Again, keeping it right in the middle of that black line. Okay, now you can see that really well now. We've got a lot of movement going on. Okay, so we're gonna line up those scores. There we go, that looks about right. Now we're just going to do the same thing, consistent, even pressure all the way through. And when you're cutting these curves, you need to rotate your elbow. That's what's gonna give you a nice, even curve. It's hard to do with just your wrist. So here's where the trick comes in. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna score this line and I'm gonna stop right at the score line instead of going through so I don't waste a lot of glass on the other side of it. So we're just gonna go on through and stop right there. Alrighty, now we'll just break it all like before. Now, this piece didn't come out quite like I wanted it to, but we can fix it up a little bit on the grinder. The part that I'm most displeased with is how this bottom part, it just doesn't have that even flow like we want. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna mark on the piece with the marker where we want to grind down to make sure that not only we take down the rough edges, but also that we are removing enough material to get that nice, even, kind of curved line effect that we're looking for this Christmas tree. So we're gonna wanna grind down a decent bit right here. And we're gonna wanna grind down quite a bit right here too. So now I'll know when I go back to grind this, I need to take care of those areas. So we'll add this to our little cut glass here. And we've got one more green piece to do. And we've got more than enough glass with this last cut off. And what I like to do is I like to orient one of the straight edges to one of the straight lines, so that way we have one less part to cut. So we're just going to do the same thing, cut right in the middle of that line, consistent even pressure all the way through. Same with this piece, consistent even pressure. We're going to go ahead and break it with our grosiers. And there you have it, a nice final piece. It's going to go right there. And now we need to cut our bottom, the front area. So pretty much the same thing with this brown piece. Now this does have a bit of a direction to it. You can tell it goes mostly this way. So we're going to want to decide, how do we want this trunk glass to be? And I think I'm going to want it vertically. And this one, it has a lot of variation with amber and brown glass. I think I'm going to want it to be mostly brown, but not too dark like this area. So I think I'm going to pick right here in this spot. This glass is very smooth on both sides. So as long as you are able to cut on that side, it should be fine. It does have a little bit more texture on this side. I can feel it. It's going to be kind of hard to tell. So just do your best. In this glass, it doesn't matter as much. So I want this to be vertical like this. And with this piece, you can almost barely see through it. You can barely see through that glass, but I can still see through it enough. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna give it a shot without the light table first. So what is that going to look like? Line up this straight edge. Now this is a really small piece. I don't wanna cut up this whole piece for just that. So I'm gonna do a little bit of a curve right there. I'm gonna pop this piece off, just like that. And now I've got a tiny piece that I can use without ruining the rest of this sheet of glass. We're gonna orient that top line. I'm gonna start with this straight line right here. There we go. And now I'm going to continue cutting, and I can barely see through it. And there you go. Now I can pop these off with the grosiers. Sweep the pattern off, and now we've got all of our pieces cut. And let's see how that little trunk came out, even though we couldn't really see too well. So there you have it. It fits in there pretty good. So that's definitely gonna pass. So now we've got all the glass cut. We need to take these pieces over to the grinder and get all of the rough edges grinded down, and then we'll be ready to clean them up and start copper foiling. This was the piece where we have some black on both of these. We're going to start with that one. See how it's a little too straight? I want it to have more of a nice curve, kind of like how my fingers are oriented. There you go, that's a pretty nice little curve there. Once we put it on the pattern, we'll see if we need to do any more. But we are going to go ahead and flatten the rest of this out. We've got all of our pieces all grinded down, and now it's time to get them cleaned up so that we can start to copper foil them. And this piece is coming along pretty nicely. I think it's a really good beginner project. So we are done with grinding all of the pieces, and now we need to go ahead and start cleaning them up one by one. And what you're going to want to make sure to do is clean up those edges. You want to get this rag to remove any glass dust or any debris, and when you're handling it, try to handle it on the face of the glass, not on the edges like this. You want to reduce the transfer of any oils or any impurities from your fingers onto the edges of the glass, because that's where the copper foil is going to need to adhere to. So there's our little tree trunk. Now we're going to get one of these leafy pieces. Same thing. Make sure to clean the edges especially, and try to handle it on the face. See how we grinded that down for a nice gentle curve, just enough. Make sure to remove any sort of glass dust. And you can see, if you look closely, this is why we grind it. You see how I pushed it with even pressure, and how this part of the glass was not grinded, but this part was? That's because the edge of the glass wasn't flat 90-degree angle. It was all jagged and fractured edge. So that's why we do that, to knock down any of those high areas so that it's the same across the full edge of glass. this wasn't a complete tutorial on how to cut glass. If you are interested in that, check up on the screen right here. I'll have a card linked. That's to a tutorial I made on how to cut glass from A to Z, including tools, steps, and techniques. And we're almost done cleaning up all of our pieces. You're starting to really see this thing come together. And so far, I am very pleased. There we go. And now we have all of our pieces all cleaned up and ready to start foiling. So let's take a look at them before we start. There they are. All right. So now that we've got all of our pieces cut and clean, we're gonna go over to the copper foiling jig. And this is a little bit maybe unusual if you haven't seen any of my other videos on how people normally copper foil, but this is my preferred method, so maybe you'll like it too. So this right here is my copper foiling jig. It's just a creator's foiler with a C-clamp to the table. And I just find this to be a really easy way to foil my pieces. So all you have to do is you take your piece, try to handle it on the faces, not on the edges like we mentioned earlier. You stick it into the groove like so. Sometimes to get it started you have to, there we go. So what I'm gonna do is remove a little bit of this material, and then we're gonna start it right from that roll. So I'm gonna make sure that the foil is oriented right on the little wheel, and we'll stick this right into the groove. And what I like to do on this part that we first just foiled, I like to fold it over, and you'll see why in a little bit. So then I'll just keep a nice even pressure rolling this piece through that groove, adhering that foil, and as you put it in that groove, it also centers it on the glass. So you're applying it and centering it at the same time. And you'll just keep moving the piece through. And you can curve it around all the edges. That's really why I like this method. You don't have to do it by hand, and you don't have to sacrifice your quality for speed. And now that we've got this piece right here, we'll just cut that. And now you can see everything is ready to be folded over. It's all nicely centered. So what we'll do is we're going to start right here. What I like to do is I like to fold it over, zip it up to the next corner, fold it over, zip it up, fold it over. I like to zip it up all the way. Here's where we started. Make sure to fold that over. Fold that over, zip it up, fold it over. And now we're gonna finish burnishing in a little bit, but that's just the piece, you know, it's got a nice, even copper foil reveal all the way around, and you get good results that way. Now, one thing you do wanna be careful of, if you didn't grind your glass, you don't really wanna be zipping this because it could have a sharp edge of this glass, and it could go through it, tear the foil, and cut you. So you're gonna want to avoid zipping it if you have not grinded your edges. We've got all of our pieces here foiled up, and now we need to burnish them. So there's many different tools you can use. This is my favorite tool, this plastic fid. People can use markers, pretty much anything that's plastic that won't damage your glass will work. But I prefer this tool because it has curved and straight edges. So I just feel like I can get the best results that way. Now we're burnishing. What I'll normally do is I'll move everything to the side, and as I burnish it, I'll put it on the pattern. So first, before we do all that, I'm gonna go ahead and sweep the pattern off. And we don't need either of these tools or any of these three tools anymore. These are all for glass cutting, so we can move these away. We'll go ahead and start from the bottom. Now, when you're burnishing, you want to burnish in towards the center. You don't want to knock the foil off. So that's an important consideration. Make sure to burnish in towards the center. And we're just smoothing out all of these kind of rough edges that is left from folding the foil over. And one thing I forgot to mention, you do want to actually start from the edges first, because you don't want to trap any air if you burnish down the faces first. So do the edges first, make them all nice and smooth, and try to look out for where you first or I mean to say, when you terminated the last of the foil, because you don't want to be knocking that edge up. You want to be pushing it down only. So we've got, I'm going to re-burnish this side now in case we pushed any air into it. There we go. Now turn it over. Burnish this face down, nice and flat. Try to burnish in towards the center as much as possible. And you'll know if you make a mistake, you'll have to redo it. So we'll do this piece next, do the edges first. And let's look for the, okay, so this is where it terminated. Kind of hard to see, but you don't want to knock it up. You want to push it down. So that's one thing to look for. And you'll see, if you knock it up by mistake, just push it through to the other direction and you'll be fine. We're still at the stage where you can fix stuff. So you want to pay a little bit more attention right now and just try to make sure that everything is going to be the way you want it, because that copper foil is going to make the solder stick wherever it is. So if it's in the right spot, it'll stick in the right spot. If it's in the wrong spot, it'll stick in the wrong spot. In the copper foiling tutorial, I did go over a full couple of things you can do, including using a special grinder bit. That would probably be my #1 recommendation if you do insist on using one of those really just heavily textured pieces that are really hard to foil and to burnish. Now, for the soldering process, it's important to have a few items. At least that's what I like to have. First up are some gloves. A lot of these materials are kind of nasty, and I don't personally like to interact with them with my skin, so I like to wear gloves. And some people also go a step further and wear heat-resistant gloves, kind of almost like oven mittens. Not exactly like that, but kind of like that. Tools we're going to need are soldering iron. We're going to need some flux. Got a little bit here in this cap, and we'll need a little flux brush to apply it. And so we're going to get our iron plugged in. Oh, and you also need some ventilation. That's why we have this is a exhaust fume extractor. So you want a well-ventilated area with some fume extraction to not inhale any of that harmful, toxic fumes. Okay, we've got the iron heating up. And we're also going to be using some lead-free solder. So if you choose to purchase this item outright, just know that it is made with lead-free solder, so it's safe to handle. And we'll also be using a little bit of wire for a little hook on the top, and we'll show you how we do that in just a little bit. So now what I like to do is I do like to secure this down with a few nails, or you can use thumbtacks. And this is just going to keep this glass from moving around everywhere, especially in the beginning. So we'll just put a few nails in here. It's not going to be, we're not building a house here. We're just framing in our little pieces of glass. And that one was a little bit in the wrong spot. Let's see here. There we go. So this is the benefit of having a work table with a sacrificial top that you can use to put nails in. And if you're doing stained glass, you're probably going to want that. And this is a pretty good, it's holding together pretty good. I like the way that it looks so far. And we're going to be using this 100 watt Weller soldering iron. I find that for copper foiling these lead-free solder windows or little panels, you need a little bit of a hotter iron, and the little Hacko just doesn't seem to cut it for me personally. Oh, one other thing that's very important is that, of course, how could I ever forget? You need an N95 mask to keep from breathing in that stuff too. So make sure to protect yourself. It is important. Now, we're going to be starting with what we call tack soldering. And that's when you apply just a little bit of flux to a couple areas that are joining multiple pieces. And this is going to really give the panel a lot of strength to allow you to solder the rest of it without having to nail in every single edge. You're going to want to make sure that
we're coming to the point of no return now. So you're gonna want to make sure that this piece is oriented the way you want it. It looks good. And so far, I am happy with the way it looks. So we're gonna see if we can put a little drop of solder on here, just like that. So what I'll do is I'll just feed a little bit of solder onto the tip of the iron, and I'll just drop it on there. We're not building a house here. We're just barely tack soldering this together so it doesn't move. So that when we solder the rest of it, everything is secure. See, everything just moved together a little bit. Want to keep this little Christmas tree right where it's at. Push it up there. And now after this one, it'll pretty much be holding together pretty good. Put a nice glob on there. And now you can see this whole thing is holding together just from that little bit. See that? So we don't need these nails anymore. But I'm gonna go ahead and flip this pattern upside down. We don't need that anymore. So here you go. Now we've got this little panel. It's tack soldered, and we're gonna go ahead. Oh, we need to apply a little bit more flux because we only barely applied a little bit. And probably I'm gonna go a little bit overboard here, but this is so small that you'll be able to knock it out pretty quickly. There you go. Just feed a little bit of solder onto there. There you have it. So soldering, this is such a small piece. You just want to keep that iron hot, and in order to get a good bead with this lead-free, you need to have a really hot iron. And just try to do it in one run. Don't try to stop in the middle. That's when you're going to get a lot of rough edges and bubbles and all that. And so you'll also notice that I tinned the edges. So to tin the edges, you simply just run, this iron has a little bit of solder loaded onto it. So we can just use that and just dispense a little bit more. And that's what that looks like. So now we've got one side, you have to flip it over and do the exact same thing here. Okay, we're all tinned up. Now, with a small piece like this, you might have to let it cool a little bit. Let's see if we can do it without doing that. I'm gonna try to smooth out all of these runs. There we go. There we go. Looks good. Okay. And now we need to do the edge beading. So this is so small, I do not want to touch it. I like to use 2 pieces of wood. And I like to prop this little panel up. Woo, woo, that's hot. I like to prop it up like this. And now I can edge bead all this without having to touch it. So you can imagine if you're holding the panel and you drop solder onto your finger, it's gonna hurt. So you wanna avoid that. And this is how I do it. We've got our iron. We're gonna do a little bit of dripping on here. So I'll load the tip, apply the solder, and sometimes there's enough from the edge beading that it'll kind of put a nice bead on there. You don't want it to really be simply tinned. You do want it to be a little bit thicker than just tinned. And let's see how that looks. We'll give it a moment to dry. There we go. We'll just flex this area up. And now we can apply some solder. There we go. Now the reason why we have to do it this way is because solder will fall from the gravity. It becomes a liquid when it's in its molten state. So before it cools and solidifies, it'll just drip like water. And that is what we are trying to sort of use to our advantage to keep it in the same correct spot. And here we go. we'll do, I think this might be the third and final side. We'll see. And if it does glob up a lot like that, we can fix that when it's flat. It's kind of hard to work on that stuff when it's on the edge. So now that we've got it flat, I want to just lightly touch some of these areas that are really hot and really built up. Okay, so now this is great and all, but we want to take it a step further, and we want to put a little ring on there. So what I like to do is I like to take my wire, fold it like this, and now I can kind of put this on there, something like this. So this might not be quite correct. Let's do a little bit more material. This might be too tight of a loop. I think that'll work. Let's cut this off. So what we're gonna do is back into the little pieces of wood. We're gonna put it right sort of where we want it. And we're gonna just do a little tack solder on there. Try to use this thing, some sort of pliers or something, just to hold it so that you're not doing it with your fleshy fingers. I don't need much, I just need enough just to barely tack solder it on there. There we go. See that? Let that dry, cool off. We're actually going to cut this down just a little bit, maybe about right there-ish. Even on this side, it's a little bit long. Let's see if we can get it. There we go. So then we'll see if we can put it in here. Let's see if we can tack solder this side down now. I think we can. Just put a little bit of flex on there. Grab a little drop of solder. Just like that. And now we're going to try to push it down without hurting ourselves. There we go. Now that's a nice big drop of solder. That'll hold that in. And then we can work on the rest of it. So that's good. Okay. So now we kind of want to align this wire to the center of that glass edge. So the way I do that, just use your pliers. That's a nice smooth edge bead right there. And I will let that cool, and then we'll take care of it from the other sides. Let's see what we can do. I'm gonna just drag this excess over here. Try to encompass all this wire right there. There we go. See how that's really holding all that wire in now? And that's pretty much it. We just have to clean it up. So just grab your favorite glass cleaner, blue glass cleaner of course, and a rag. And this one is still very hot, but that's okay. Okay, we are finished up with the Christmas tree. And if you like that video, I think you'll like our other videos in the holiday playlist. So go ahead and go check those out too after this one. And let's get this up in the window and see how it looks.